topic. I'll begin that again. So a couple months ago, I had a chance to sit down with Susana and realized how much of a timely topic this is, this trauma informed, and how it applies especially to us who are coaches. So I just want to do a quick introduction to her and then turn it over to her, because I know we really want to hear from her, not from me or from the board and the members here of ICF Orange County. So Susana Rinderle is a PCC and also has a master's degree. She's a writer, poet, transformational life and leadership coach, and trauma-informed resilience practitioner. Her first career was in diversity, equity, inclusion, and organization development, where she spent nearly 30 years garnering results for employers and clients across the US and abroad as an internal subject matter expert, organizational leader, and external consultant. Susana is a former principal consultant for Korn Ferry in the leadership development practice and a TEDx speaker. Her articles have appeared in multiple commercial publications and academic journals. She has been coaching for 12 years and is a professional certified coach and an ICF mentor coach. She is a certified facilitator of the Resilience Toolkit, a body-focused, trauma-informed set of 8 tools informed by 13 scientific models that can calm the nervous system, and this is incredible, in under a minute. So that those models can calm the nervous system in under a minute. Her own life has been transformed since she began practicing these tools in January 2019, and she has taught them to hundreds of people in multiple walks of life in 8 countries. So again, it's my pleasure to introduce and turn over to all of you, Susana Rinderle.
Yay! So that yay is for me, but also for you all. I highly recommend presenting to groups, because if you ever want an ego boost, listen to how someone else introduces you. And it's always such a moment of, wow, you know, who is that person? And just a lot of gratitude for my path and for you all. I was just so connected and inspired and curious by all of the things you put in the chat about what you brought to the session and what inspired you to sign up today and to be present. So thank you so much for that curiosity, that commitment, that courage, that generosity of spirit. And I want to say thank you to ICF Orange County for inviting me to be here today. Daryl and I connected a few months ago, and he has been so supportive, as has Nanor, and also Lori and Michael. So thank you to the chapter and to all of you for your generous time and curiosity today. So I want to also welcome you. And I want to say there's only one thing you need to be in the session today, and that's a human body. Your body looks nothing like this picture. I know mine doesn't. But the invitation is to maybe just see if you might be willing and able to bring the whole body or parts of the whole body. We're really good at above the neck, but maybe the whole body might want to come and play too. The second thing, and this is completely voluntary, is something to write with. So if you're like me and you like to jot down notes or draw pictures or stay engaged or have that handy so you can let whatever task comes to mind during the session get its place on the list to do, then you can certainly do that. This, as you heard, is being recorded, but the slide deck will not be provided. So you are welcome to come back and listen to the recording, take screenshots. There won't be a whole lot of slides. I just want to let you know ahead of time that the deck will not be coming to you later so that you can manage your own learning around that. You're going to notice that some things will be different in how I do the session today. So there will be some slides. There will be some analog tools like what I just showed you. There will be pauses. There will be invitation to use the chat or bring your voice. And so just want to let you know that there may be some things that are different than what you're used to. And the reason for that is that my intent today is to not just talk about trauma-informed coaching, but to also conduct my portion of today's session in a trauma-informed manner. So you'll see more me, my face, me looking at the camera, looking in your eyes, and doing things a little differently today. I also want to let you know that you have my full attention, and when you see me looking away, it's because I'm looking at my notes or I'm thinking. And I also want to let you know there won't be any breaks. That's usually pretty standard for 60 minutes. However, please take care of that body in whatever way it lets you know it needs care, whether that means taking a drink, getting some food, lying down, standing up, walking around, being on camera, being off camera, or deciding not to be here at all. So as a trauma-informed space, this is also 100% consent. So I'm not going to coerce you into looking or being any particular way. I would invite you, however, to be mindful about how your participation impacts the community. So for example, it can be tempting in a lot of webinars for people to use the chat a lot. And for those of us that are introverts, that are highly sensitive, that are visual learners, and that are carrying a high chronic stress load or trauma, that can provide a lot of stimuli that makes it hard for us to be present and to fully listen. So that's not me indirectly saying, please don't use the chat. It's simply me saying, be mindful in how much you're using the chat and how that might impact our community here. I'm pretty good at monitoring both, but I know Daryl's got my back in terms of if there's something that's coming up for you or a question that I'm missing, he's going to help me make sure I'm not missing any of your questions. There will be ample opportunity to reflect, interact, and ask questions. I'm not going to just fire hose you information because that would also not be trauma informed. Keep in mind, folks, that also this is being recorded. So think about, this is also in terms of being trauma informed. Know that what your face and whatever it is that you're doing or sharing will be recorded and shared with other people. So just to keep that in mind, if we were on one of my more intimate seminars, we would actually have a conversation about whether we wanted to be recorded. But know that that decision was already made. Okay, so I'm going to pause and take care of my body. All right. So I've got 4 intentions for today, for today's session. I'm hoping that by the end, by 12 o'clock for those of us here in California, 3 o'clock for those of you joining us from the East Coast and anywhere in between, that you'll walk away understanding the reality of what trauma is and where it lives. I just felt so good when I saw so many people writing the word trauma in the chat. It's beautiful to me now that even just saying that word is less stigmatized, but I want to talk about what it really is and where it lives. Number 2, I hope that by the time you walk away, you'll start to have some sense of how trauma and chronic stress show up in coaching sessions and clients' lives around the coaching sessions. I'm seeing some of your nervous systems responding to that. Number 3, gain a little bit of clarity about how to be more trauma informed as a professional coach. And finally, obtain one practical tool for down regulating your own nervous system activation. As you heard in Daryl's very kind intro, I am a certified practitioner of the Resilience Toolkit, which is a body-focused, trauma-informed somatic modality. You'll get to experience one of those tools today. So those are my intentions. If it would serve your learning, take a few moments to just reflect for yourself on what your intent or your learning goal might be for yourself. And I want to invite you to keep that to yourself for now. So if it would serve you, just reflect and maybe jot it down. If that doesn't serve you, maybe just give yourself some wonderful spaciousness to just fully arrive. Okay, and if you're still reflecting, that is welcome. Just going to check in with my ally here, Daryl. Am I forgetting any important housekeeping before we move forward?
I don't think so. I think you covered it all perfectly.
Okay, I see Nanor also, her nodding. Beautiful. Okay, folks. So to me, it's important, respectful, and honest to also acknowledge and name that I stand on the shoulders and backs and lay in the arms of many other people. I'm not here on my own volition. I've had the privilege of being supported and taught by many people, some of whom I never will know. So I was born and currently live on the land of the Tongva people here in northern Los Angeles. I thank my ancestors, some of whom names I know, some of whom's names I will never know. I do know enough to know that many of them were extremely traumatized and also highly resilient. So I want to honor and bring them into the space. My many teachers, Nkem Ndefo, Gabor Mate, Ariel Schwartz, Peter Levine, Bessel van der Kolk, Nancy Forrester, Resma Menakem, and many of my clients. So those names may resonate with you, may not, but I want to call my teachers into the space and also express gratitude for all the many generations of unpaid and underpaid, as well as incarcerated labor that have enabled me to enjoy a tremendous middle-class living in the United States in 2021. So bringing them into the space. I'm going to provide a visual now. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, I'd love to get a sign from some nervous systems about whether or not you can see that. All right, thank you. So you heard a bit about me. I am also a client of coaching and multiple mental health and healing modalities throughout most of my life. I am a coach, as you heard, also very fortunate to be trusted as a mentor coach. I'm also a trauma survivor. So this isn't something that I understand from an abstract or disembodied perspective. It's something I've lived my entire life. So I am a survivor of early childhood and attachment trauma, as well as relational trauma in adulthood. And I have an ACEs score of 3, which is high. If any of you are familiar with that. You heard about my work with the Resilience Toolkit, and I want to let you know I have a bias that I believe that coaches are facilitators of self-discovery primarily, and that self-discovery can even be healing. And that can be a bit edgy and maybe even controversial in some coaching spaces. And I very much believe that, having been on both sides of that healing as both coach and client. That's something I wouldn't be able to say in Canada. They have very clear guidelines that coaches cannot say that healing is one of the possible outcomes. And I also find that that can be true. So I'm a believer that coaching is a vehicle for transformation, even healing, and can be. And I have a very controversial belief, which I've written about in some of my articles, that actually trauma-informed coaches can facilitate transformation and healing more effectively than a non-trauma-informed therapist. And having been traumatized by non-trauma-informed therapists, I find that can be true. That doesn't mean that I think all coaches can and should be doing that work, but I wanted you to know about, I wanted to be transparent and let you know about my biases around that belief. Okay, folks. So I'm just going to pause there and look at you for a moment. All right, beautiful. Okay, so I'd like to move into my first intention for today, which is to share what trauma really is and where it lives. And keep in mind, folks, that today's session is very much an overview. We're just going to kind of caress the surface of this topic. So just sort of being with also maybe what questions end up unanswered. Of course, if you have questions that I can answer, I'll do that. But unfortunately, some of what you might walk away with is even more questions today. We're just going to sort of touch the surface here. Here are some of my favorite definitions of trauma. Too much too fast. An overwhelming threat we're not equipped to deal with. Has nothing to do with character or intelligence or worth or value. It has to do with the balance of stressors and resources in our system, in our bodies. I'll talk about that more in a moment. Gabor Mate says it's not what happens to us, but what happens inside of us as a result of what happened. Based on that balance of stressors and resources. This is why one event can be severely traumatizing to one person, not at all traumatizing to another person, or moderately traumatizing to another. So children growing up in a dysfunctional family, a community living through a natural disaster, a group of folks in a car accident, can have very disparate experiences of trauma based on the balance of stressors and resources. And trauma lives in the body. It actually lives in the autonomic nervous system. As a neuroscience geek, especially in diversity, equity, and inclusion, where I was an evangelist for unconscious bias for a long time and used a lot of that knowledge in my TED Talk, I've also learned that there's a limitation to the central nervous system. And we are now learning what our ancestors knew, relearning, that trauma lives and is coded in the body outside of the brain and the spinal cord. And the body views both acute trauma and chronic stress the same. So acute would be one very extreme, horrible incident, like a natural disaster, like a car accident, like an assault. Chronic may be less extreme, but ongoing. So too much too fast, not enough for too long, too much for too long. Growing up in a family where basic emotional needs were not met, trying to function in a toxic work environment or in a crumbling industry or institution, navigating the world in a Black, brown, BIPOC, queer, female body. This is chronic stress that the body codes the same as acute trauma. And so again, it's dependent on stressors and resources. What does this mean, Susana? The balance of stressors and resources has to do with the stressors that come both from outside us and inside us, and the resources that come from both inside us and outside of us. So our genetics, our individual personality type, our constitution, these can be places where we have encoded intergenerational trauma or a particular tendency towards anxiety or some other orientation like high sensitivity. But also our resources can come from our genetics, but it goes out beyond us. So it's in our genetics, in our body, in our personal history, but also in our family, in the home we grew up in the neighborhood we grew up in the nation and the policies and the community and the infrastructure, in the physical environment, and in the history of the land and the people around us. So it's important in the conversation about trauma that we avoid individualizing the problem and the solution. We do have choice and agency, but oftentimes the source of the stress, as well as many of the sources of the resources, come from beyond us. So holistic approaches recognize both. And I want to normalize, and I really love what you said, Lori, in the chat as we were entering, and I very much resonate with this, that trauma is now widespread and common, even and especially in top organizations and C-suite leaders. I very much believe that there is not a community, racial, ethnic group, nation, organization, or boardroom that is not trauma-free. And like you, some of my most traumatized clients have been top leaders in top organizations, partly because I mostly work with BIPOC and women in those roles. But I believe that it's not so much whether or not there's trauma, but how much. Where are we on the spectrum? Okay. So that was a lot. And I'm going to pause to just check in with your nervous systems and ask, what clarifying questions can I answer? And my pause is not an expectation that you need to fill it, but rather an invitation. There's something that you would like to clarify. Feel free to bring your voice into the space or the chat.
So I have a question, if I may.
Brigitte?
Yeah, Brigitte.
Brigitte?
Yeah. When you gave us the reflection time, I wrote down who does not have trauma of any kind. So in your experience, are there people who have never had trauma or high stress?
Brigitte, that is a beautiful question. Thank you for bringing that into the space. I don't know. I mean, I'm a believer, just because I haven't seen it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But even if we think about the birth process, it's very traumatizing. So my belief today, and this may change, is that being alive is traumatizing. Now, what we also know from science as well as traditional wisdom is that, and also you're all very sophisticated professional coaches, there is an optimal level of stress and activation that is healthy for humans. If we don't have enough adversity early in our life, then we don't quite build the resilience and the skill set around managing that moving forward. But if we have too much, it debilitates us. So there is a bit of a Goldilocks middle ground. So I hate to say it, but that almost makes it sound like some trauma is good for us. I don't know if I like that wording, but yeah, I think my answer is I don't know, but probably not. But I invite you to sit with that curiosity as well as you move forward and see what you think. Beautiful. What other clarifying questions might I answer? Rachel?
Hi, Susana.
Hi.
My question is around, you mentioned be careful not to individualize like the experience around trauma. And can you speak to that a little bit more?
I can. Wonderful question. Thank you for that. So my intent there, this is a whole sort of bigger piece called the socio-ecological model of trauma, but it really is about normalizing, especially in the United States, we are a very individualistic culture. And I'm not saying that as we're bad, I'm saying it's limited. And so our default, especially in white USian culture, is to think very individualistically. And that can blind us to the fact that oftentimes the stressors are outside of the individual. So they're the institutions around us. They are the history of racism and sexism and genocide. They are the policies in our organization or in our nation that are actually creating some of that stress or trauma. Also, those can be resources. So if I have a strong racial or ethnic identity, if I have a strong sense of community, I belong to a faith tradition or organization that gives me a sense of belonging, those things can also be sources of resource for us. So if you were to engage with me or one of my colleagues in one-on-one work or take one of my longer workshops, we would actually invite folks to sort of unpack that for themselves personally, but to always have that pulled back lens for ourselves and our clients, that the problem and the solution are not only located in the individual, because what that does is it starts to create a blame the victim and overburdening of the individual when oftentimes the source is not them. The beauty of resilience work, especially in the way I'm trained, is that, there's our founder is a very clear social justice mandate that we are helping equip bodies and nervous systems to be more resilient, not just so that we can live healthier, longer, more fulfilling lives, but that we then have the bandwidth to change the external sources of stress and create a world that works better for more of us.
Wouldn't that mostly be the case that the trauma is an external?
I think it depends on the person. So I, for example, have, as you heard, experienced a lot of trauma in my family of origin. And I also know through DNA analysis that I've got some programming in my genetics.
Got it. Thank you.
Which is individual and also collective. Yeah. Thank you, Danny, for naming eustress. Yes. So I'm going to move on because I want to be a good steward of your time. And I'm just checking your faces to see if there's anything important I'm missing. I see some smiles. Okay, beautiful. So normally here, I sort of bring up, there's an elephant in the room here about the trauma word and that clients aren't traumatized. But I'm not hearing that that's really where you all are at. Sounds like we all are kind of on the same page, at least from what I'm hearing and seeing, that we get that that might be something we deal with our clients. So what I'd like to invite now is sometimes even talking about trauma can start to bring up our stuff and bring up our stress. So here's where I'd like to meet another one of the intentions for today, which is to introduce you to one of the tools. So there are three. Going to shuffle my my visual aids here. There are these three anchoring questions for the Resilience Toolkit tools. I'll invite you to reflect on these if that would be useful for your learning. The first question is, what is your stress level right now? You may want to define that on a numerical scale. It may be a word or phrase, could be low, moderate, high, rare, medium, well done, could be a color, a gesture. And the word stress may not work for you. You might like a different word instead of stress, and that's welcome. The second question, folks, for those of you who find this useful, is how do I know? How do I know? So that's where that body can tell us, oh, I'm feeling this. I'm noticing that that is absent. So based on what lets you know that's your stress level. The key here, folks, is building your own body literacy, which, spoiler alert, is the #1 way that you can be a more trauma-informed coach. Because the best gift another human being can give another human being is a well-regulated nervous system. And that's not just in coaching, it's in life. The third question is my stress level congruent? Congruent, what does that mean? That means that is normalizing that all of our stress responses are adaptive. They are all our beautiful body's genius of keeping us safe. And so we don't want to stigmatize them. The question, however, is my stress response matching what's going on around me physically, around me geographically, around me metaphorically, spiritually? Does it match? And if it doesn't match, what curiosity might be there about shifting or not? So that question is normalizing all stress responses as adaptive and inviting agency and choice. Folks, being well regulated does not mean we're always calm and zen. I hear that word well regulated being used now to mean no. If that were true, we would have evolved out of activated and shut down states. Well regulated means we're flexible. We move in and out of those states as the situation requires. So if your stress level is not congruent, or you would like to shift it for any reason, I'll invite you to engage in this tool, which is called the butterfly hug. Our youth like to call it the bee hug. Because it's trauma informed, please watch before you do, so that if you say yes, you know what you're saying yes to. So first I'll demonstrate, and then you can try. When I do the butterfly hug, there's no particular way for me to sit or breathe. I'm going to center my own comfort. I'm going to orient to comfort and stop or redirect anything that makes me feel more uncomfortable than I did at the start. And again, watch before you try. I'm going to create this beautiful butterfly, or some of you may have done this or seen this as a bird. And I'm just going to lay her on my chest with my fingers just underneath the collarbone. And I'm going to flap those wings back and forth on my chest like so. Now, if I notice that my body does not like hands on my chest, then I might put those on my legs, on my thighs. The important thing, folks, is that my hands are crossed and the movements are alternating. It doesn't matter which hand is on top, just whatever feels most yummy to my body. All right? So for those of you for whom it's a yes to trying the butterfly hug, just orienting to comfort, sitting and breathing in a way that just feels good, creating that butterfly, laying her on your chest with the fingers under the breastbone, knowing that there's no way to get that wrong, and just alternating the hands back and forth, flapping those wings back and forth. Yeah, just noticing how your body responds to the bee hug, stopping if you feel any increase in stress, discomfort, or anxiety. And you may or may not want to experiment with the speed of the wings. How does my body respond if I speed up or slow down the flaps? Stopping at any time you feel any increase in stress or discomfort. And you may or may not want to experiment with pressure. Just a lighter pressure or firmer pressure. How does that impact my nervous system? Yeah. So my body is feeling complete, so I'm going to stop, but you are welcome to continue the bee hug if your body is really liking that. Just noticing how your body responds. Yes. Beauty of the butterfly hug, there are no limitations on this tool. You can use it multiple times a day with no adverse effects. It's also beautiful because you can do it on the down low. I have clients that have done it on their lap during meetings. I've had clients in real life who've done it under the table during executive meetings. No one has to know. I often do it before coaching sessions. So folks, we go back to our anchoring questions. What is my stress level now?
I'm sorry, Susana, just really quickly, because someone
Yeah,
asked if we
sure.
could demonstrate the on the lap technique again.
Oh, sure.
Before we move on.
Absolutely. Thanks, Daryl.
Sure.
Missed that, Julia. Thank you. So it's just crossed on the lap, flapping back and forth. Yeah. Did you get that, Julia? Okay, I see your face. Beautiful. So folks, we go back to our questions because we need to assess whether that tool worked for us or not. So what's your stress level now and how do you know? Knowing that this is not an exercise and please the facilitator. If your body was a no, thank you, ma'am, to the bee hug, that is welcome. That is beautiful information. Not all bodies like all the tools all the time. And that's why there are more than one. If it would be useful for you to put in the chat how that tool went for you, that is welcome. And I just heard that the construction workers came back from break. So if you hear any very loud drilling in the background, do please take my apologies. We're in week 139. And I have no control. So I'm just going to manage my nervous system and apologize. There's no place I can hide in my home. Yes, absolutely, Greta. Yes. Thank you. Calming, beautiful noticing. Yeah. Butterfly jug. No change. Ah, beautiful noticing. Yep. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Rachel, wonderful noticing. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So the key here is always experimenting and honoring your body's no. Resistance is a no. Yeah. All right. Sure. So feel welcome to continue to express those effects in the chat if that serves you. I also want to name, Anne, that I did see your question and I am not ignoring you. I will come back to your question. Where are you? About collective trauma in orgs. Okay, there you are. Yes. Hi, I'll come back to you. Okay. All right. Okay, folks. Wonderful. So thank you for saying yes or no to that activity. Whatever was alive for you. I'm going to go back to my slides now. Okay. So you are welcome to use that practice, as I mentioned, willy-nilly in your own life, but please avoid teaching it to clients. The reason is that the simplicity can be deceptive. If someone has a trauma load or high chronic stress and they start to down-regulate or download some of that chronic stress or trauma, you have to be trained to recognize and facilitate that. Otherwise, you might unconsciously do harm. So if you feel like those sorts of tools would be useful, please refer folks to a certified facilitator of the Resilience Toolkit or another somatic modality, myself or anyone else. We talked about the elephant. So attending today does not qualify you as trauma informed. This is a rigorous ongoing journey that requires training and personal work, but this is certainly one place to start your journey. I love science. I would like to throw a little bit, just a little bit of brush of science for you around understanding the trauma response in humans. If you decide to pursue more learning with me, we go into this in more depth, but I find that this can start to give some framework to people to understand themselves as well as clients, particularly in organizations, which Anne might start to answer your question. So I've created this concept of the house of stress based on a few of those models out there. And if we think of our bodies as a house, it has 3 floors. The first floor is the green floor, also known as social nervous system. Its operative words are connected, spacious, settled, and safe. So as I go through these floors, you might think about, how do I know when I'm on these different floors? What shows up in my nervous system that lets me know I'm on this floor? Now, social doesn't mean that we introverts suddenly become gregarious. It simply means that this is the floor on which humans and other mammals, other animals as well, are most able to connect with ourselves, others, community, environment, and even spirit. The second floor is the yellow floor. This is activated. This is fight and flight, but also annihilate. And the words here are pressure, mobilize, react, destroy. The third floor is red. This is freeze. Human beings actually, as a highly social species, have more versions of freeze than other species. We have 4. But suffice it to say for now that the words here are disconnect, numb, collapse, disappear. Couple key takeaways here, folks, from the house of stress, aside from sort of noticing how you might experience these floors, starting to maybe get curious about how you notice other people. One key concept is that our bodies, outside of our awareness, knowledge, permission, and even emotions, can instantaneously on a trampoline send us up to the 2nd or 3rd floor. based on how serious and imminent it perceives the threat to be, because the third floor is a more extreme response to threat. First concept. Second concept is that if our bodies end up on the third floor, we can't jump out the window to the first floor. We have to take the stairs. What that means is that all animals, if we end up in a freeze state, we have to go through activation before we fully settle back to home, which is social nervous system. Our bodies were designed to only take quick vacations to the second and third floor. However, because we've created a civilization where many of the threats are neither physical, sometimes even visible, like a pandemic, and that we can't fully escape, it's common now for people to move in to the second or third floor, or particularly to go back and forth between the first and second, between the second and third floor. Also, as a highly social species, we are very good at what's called practiced social nervous system, where we look like we're in the green, but we're actually in the red. Very common in the workplace. So what happens when the threat goes away? When the pandemic eases off, when the toxic leader is removed, when the threat of having to do layoffs is eased, that's when pandemonium breaks out. Because that's the freeze in the system starting to thaw out. So from a trauma-informed somatic perspective, it makes complete sense to me that right now is when there are record complaints being filed with HR. We have record traffic accidents here in LA. It's because all of the nervous systems who were frozen during the height of COVID are thawing out, and we have to go through activation to fully settle. That doesn't mean that we excuse bad behavior. We don't create containers around it, but understanding that's what's happening can help us better navigate instead of thinking, oh my God, there's escalation. This also happens when a consultant or a coach comes in and starts to work with a team, and people start to feel safe and relax and settle. And that's when all the conflict explodes. It's actually a sign of life, but it requires a lot of skill and knowledge to navigate. Okay, so I can see a lot of neurons firing. There's just a little touch of some science to maybe add some sense to what you might be seeing. Okay. So folks, again, we're just going to really broad brush here, and then I'll pause to check in. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to pause there to let that metabolize for a moment. And if you've got a question, just hold on to it for a second. Just let that metabolize. So actually, I'm going to check to see if there are any quick clarifying questions. If there's something you didn't hear or understand and won't be able to let go of. Let me just check in to see if there's any clarifying questions. I see smiles. I see curiosity. Okay.
Susana, this is Carol.
Yes, Carol. Hi, Carol.
Hi. I'm wondering, I'm really fascinated by this notion you talked about moving from shutdown back to activated in order to return to social. Is that something like what happens when you have a dysfunctional system and someone in that system starts to get better, but things get worse in the system?
Ooh. Ooh, wow. Let me introvert on that. Oh, hi, Kitty. I'm not entirely sure. I think it would depend. Because what I'm hearing you name there is sort of the systems effects of healing that can occur. I'm not sure it's exactly the same thing, Carol, would be my short answer. And there may be some of that nervous system down regulation in the person that's healing that might be affecting the system reorganization.
Okay. It just is so amazing how these things kind of reverberate.
Yes, especially in highly social species like humans. Because all animals go through this process. If you've seen the videos from National Geographic and the, the lion gets the gazelle and the gazelle goes into a form of freeze and the lion goes, oh, I guess they're sick or dead. I think I changed my mind, and goes away. The gazelle will kind of lay there in what's called collapsed immobility for a moment. And then it will sort of do this shake and go away and run off. Humans know how to do this too. Our culture just teaches us not to. So it's the same process we share with other life forms. But because we're highly social, there are additional layers onto the whole process. Thank you for naming that. Yeah. Okay, folks. So again, with apologies that this is just going to be a real gentle caress on the top of a deep and rich topic. This is a work in progress as I continue to learn and work with my clients and collaborate with colleagues that are doing similar work, ironically, mostly in Europe. Not a lot of folks in the US, apparently, it seems. But the things that I notice during sessions that are important in my top 5 are extreme pendulum swings in sensation, behavior, affect, chronic victim and helplessness. And this is more for me a sense of how extreme and how often. So it's the acuity and the frequency here, I think, is key in determining, whether we might be dealing with chronic stress, trauma, an outlier. My teacher would probably argue it's all trauma, it's just a matter of degree. Control, high anxiety, and focus on details. That's one of my go-tos. Black and white thinking. That's a trauma response. We get very narrow. We're on that yellow floor of the house of stress. Resistance, folks, is a trauma response. If you read one of my articles, I actually tell a story of when I lost one of when I was being coached and mentored, the relationship ended because of the way my coach responded to my resistance, which was a trauma response. In life, it's very similar. So again, chronic lack of sense of safety. That doesn't mean that we talk our clients out of it, because especially if they're navigating the world in a differently abled, queer, BIPOC, or female body, that lack of sense of safety is real. But whether it's real or imagined or a combination of the two, that lack of sense of safety is a sign of trauma or chronic stress. Impossible standards for self, paralyzing fear of risk, or I would say over tendency to take risks. So an ineffective assessment of danger, whether over assessing danger or under assessing. Chronically frozen, numb, or stuck. So hopefully you're hearing the mapping onto the house of stress here. And again, chronic and extreme cloudy judgment, or even ability to process. So ability to hear questions, respond. These are all classic signs of chronic stress and or trauma. I'm noticing our time. So what I'd like to do now is to go, let me just check my notes here. Aha. So I'm going to pause in just a moment here, folks, but I want to go these next 2 to make sure that I'm true to our intentions for today. So you can hear more about this in the articles that I've written, but trauma-informed coaching, according to Susana, is just high quality coaching that brings this additional lens to clients' emotions and behaviors. It has an even more exaggerated and deeper focus on safety, equity, transparency, and choice, but primarily a coach commitment to self-regulation. That's really, I believe, the key part here. Coaching provided in alignment with the CDC 6 principles of trauma-informed approach. In the United States, we have the benefit of a government who's invested some time, those of you in DC, into defining these, and it's a very accessible, implementable document that you can find online. Trauma and chronic stress may or may not be the focus of the coaching engagement or any one session, but it may be, growth and healing may occur as a byproduct or sidebar of the coaching engagement. So the title of today was Trauma-Informed Coaching Isn't Necessarily About Trauma, but it's just better coaching for all clients, given what we're all dealing with. And so with the 6 principles of the trauma-informed approach, addressing cultural, historical, and gender issues is really core and sometimes missing from programs. What to do is to self-regulate, conduct more detailed intake to get a better sense of this person's selfhood and background and what other supports they might have, making sure that answering those questions is always voluntary, leaning more into safety and transparency and agency. There are lots of ways that we unintendedly coerce clients as coaches. I see it often as a mentor coach. So especially when it comes to setting the agenda and designing action and accountability, making sure that that's a partnership and that all of clients' no's, resistance, and boundaries are respected. Really eliciting and championing strengths and resources even more than normal, attending to nonverbals and mismatch between words, actions, and affect. Okay, really noticing that and being at choice ourselves about what to say and how to address that. And again, normalizing resistance. So there's more here, but those are sort of the top 7 today. Okay, so I have one more thing to share with you, but let me pause there and see what questions are still unanswered for you. And I'm asking it that way because we may or may not have time to talk about it now, given the 3 minutes, but I can certainly take a note and follow up if we don't have time. Okay, so I'm going to say 2 more things, and then I'm going to turn it back over to, I believe it's Daryl or Michael or Nanor.
Michael.
It'll be Michael. Okay, beautiful. If you feel free to, in the chat, put your #1 action item or aha from today, if that would serve your learning. And this is, again, not please the facilitator, but if this supports your learning, you can go ahead and put that in the chat. You can see my website there, traumainformedcoachingusa.com. And if it's a yes or a maybe to continuing your learning with me, then I do have a 3-week workshop that offers 4.5 CCEs. And I'd like to offer you 15% off for having been here today. So that code is good through Friday and anyone can use it. So bring a friend. The link is here, susana.link TIC series. I'll put that in the chat and your promo code is ICFOC. So thank you so much for your curiosity, the wonderful questions, and your presence today. Feel free to keep putting those takeaways or ahas in the chat.
Susana, thank you so very much. What a rich time. I know that I'm sure with only the short amount of time, you probably had so much more you could have shared. So really appreciate you sharing this passion of yours, the expertise that you've gained, the insights that you have. And great job, Daryl, for reaching out to Susana and bringing her to our chapter meeting. Appreciate that so much. As Susana offered, if there's other questions, maybe you need to ask them at a later time. Maybe Susana, is there a way that they can reach out to you, an email or something where they can reach out with questions, or is it just your website? What's the best way?
Absolutely, Michael. I'm putting my email in the chat. I am also able, well, we probably can't linger because this is the ICF Zoom link, but I am available for the next few minutes. And I'm just also putting.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So that way, you know, at your discretion, if there's something you need to reach out, you can reach Susana and follow up with her. So thank you for that. I just thank you all for being here. It's wonderful. I see that there's a lot of new faces, people from all over. I saw New York up there lately. That's my hometown. Woo-hoo. And so thank you for being here. There are some events coming up. We have a program called Coaches Connection. That'll happen this next Thursday, or actually just in a couple of days on the 26th. It's an afternoon event from 12 to 1. We would love you to be there for that. Also, one of our board members, Greta, who's on the call right now, she's hosting a credentialing series, and the second part of that credentialing series will happen next Tuesday, not next Tuesday. It will happen the first Tuesday in June. I'm sorry, my computer's not moving for me to see it. So if you'd like to learn more about that, please reach out. There's a book club, and then there's a 3-part series on storytelling. There's so much going on in June. So please check out our website if you're interested in more activities, programming events, and that's at icforangecounty.org. And then finally, we'd just like to, now Nora asked me to remind you all, if you are a member of our chapter or would like to be a member of our chapter, please, join, and we would love to have you be a part of our chapter. And with that being said, all the little stuff at the end here, once again, thank you so much for being a part of this wonderful Tuesday event. Susana, once again, thank you so much. Appreciate you so much for what you shared. And we thank you all for being here, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you. All right. And if you're still here, if you have a question for Susana, feel free. I do not have any administrative control over this Zoom because I signed in late. So I don't know who does. So Daryl, it might be you.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now, if that's okay, Susana. All
Yeah,
right.
beautiful. I was going to ask that. Yeah.